Hey y'all, I'm the captain, and this is Sailing on the Spectrum, where I talk about the challenges growing up with autism spectrum disorder. Welcome aboard. I want to talk today about basically how I came to have this. It's my wedding ring. My wife and I will have been married 10 years later this year. Actually, in a few days, it'll be kind of our 10-year anniversary since we started to date. I would say this is my Valentine's Day special. This is about people on the spectrum and how they struggle to find love. Well, there's numbers that are thrown around out there, but I have read that only 5% of people on the spectrum ever do get married. And obviously many of them struggle to find a romantic partner for various reasons that I can get into as I tell you my story. I grew up in a house where thankfully I did have a loving mom and dad, and I had good stability in the home. I had a younger sister who was 2 years younger than me, and she and I could easily have hit puberty at about the same day, for all I know. I know that we got along and had a pretty good playful relationship, as kids. I think, though, maybe once we started to hit prepubescence, maybe we hit a bit of a snag in terms of our camaraderie and in terms of, just how we got on. We just kind of prefer to be in our own bedrooms than just actually play and do stuff together. But nothing really extremely traumatic or anything along those lines. I would say there was trauma, of course, in many ways, in how I got on in the regular world, and especially in school. It was certainly enough trouble just to feel like I was doing well enough just to be in school, do the normal thing. And I think really when I became an adolescent, or when I started going to at least to middle school, and I guess really maybe then, maybe I felt more and more like I just kind of was behind everybody else. I know that girls, by the time I was in middle school, definitely were developing more. And, you couldn't help but notice. But it was enough trouble for me to feel like I was on the level with most other people in general, much less with girls who seem to always come off as, I guess, more mature, and more level-headed and stuff, than others. I'm not saying that all girls are snooty and everything like that. It's not like that. But I think maybe that was just how I came to view girls, and I felt like, in many ways, I didn't have the tools to be able to court a female and try to get to know them on a more intimate level, because I struggled to get to know anybody on an intimate level, as it were. And so I definitely felt very, I guess, inferior in that way. And that's a big thing. A lot of us on the spectrum, can definitely be struggle with self-image. We definitely have, we know we're in a world where things are a little bit askew to us, or that maybe we seem askew to everyone else. And so that just is right there, kind of a uphill run right off the bat, for all of us. But so I would go through middle school, and I never really had the ability to ask a girl out on a date, or try to do anything to kind of get to know a girl in kind of a, just really, I don't even know at least that I can call to mind, any girls who I really knew who I would consider to be friends at that stage. Of course, it was hard enough to make friendships anyways. But by the time I was in, I guess maybe about 10th grade, I may have started to feel a little bit more able to get on with some girls, but again, maybe only on a maybe on a slightly arm's length level. It's not because I didn't want to get to know girls. It's that I felt like I just didn't have the ability to, and it was too overwhelming to me, and it almost felt like too much responsibility. You know, it's enough trouble, especially for young adults on the spectrum, to be able to deal with having the independence to get out from under their parents' roof. I even read that a lot in middle age, those on the autism spectrum who are in their middle age still, are with their parents. I'm happy to say I've been out from under my parents' roof for many years now, and so, I know that by the time I was in high school, I still just had to get over the hump to be able to start to relate on a girl on kind of an equal level and feel like I could, actually talk to her. Well, I had my first crush around about 11th grade. And of course, I didn't know what the heck to do. I didn't have the courage to ask this girl out, or to feel like I could know how to be in a situation where I could just talk to her one-on-one. I had to rely on a lot trying to hang around her friend group and try to feel like I was fitting in and that I could, at least have some of her attention. But sure enough, I just realized that couldn't happen, and it just broke my heart. So I remember even being so down one day I couldn't go to school. It was that bad. I was so depressed, but I got past it, and then my senior year came and went, and I had some more girls that I could know again on a friendly level by then, but I guess, again, I just didn't have the courage to ask anyone out, and I didn't know how. Sure enough, I ended up, I graduated high school and started college, and of course, having a new set of friends and a new set of classes and environment to go to is already kind of feels like I'm starting from square one again. But I managed to, I guess maybe this time around, get on and be able to kind of relate to some degree on a equal level with more girls. But there sure enough was one that I got to know, and probably into my first semester of college, I started to really crush on her. And I started to, get in her friend, again, it was me trying to, just get into her friends group, and felt like I had to impress her all the time, and that I had to always please not only her, but everybody in what I thought maybe her clique group. I felt like that was the only strategy I knew to be able to court her favor at all. And it's a shame, because I didn't have the courage to say, I liked her, and I didn't even feel like I had the right to, because I just felt too inferior. Sure enough, that just ended up breaking my heart, and I got over that. Later on down the line in college, there was another girl. I ended up liking her. I kind of, probably didn't fall for her as quickly as maybe I fell for the others that I got to know, maybe, but still, it was, again, centered around, trying to, impress her and, be on the good side of her friend group, and always feel like you had to make the right impressions, and I've done another video about facial expression when you're on the spectrum, and how we all come off as having very weird facial expressions, but that oftentimes means that we're struggling just to make a good impression with whomever we're speaking. That certainly is big challenge in things like job interviews, and but it certainly can be when you're trying to court favor of somebody you're interested in. Um, but I don't know. I never really felt like I had good fashion sense. I mean, I'm, I don't think I ever have, but I guess now that I'm married, I really don't have to worry too much about whether my fashion is making the right impression. I just dress decently, and I don't look like a slob all the time, except maybe if I'm just around the house. But I mean, goodness, my wife's in the other room. She doesn't mind what I'm wearing. Sometimes she kind of likes it, it's just in my regular stuff, and I'm that way with her. But it's like, but here I was in college, and there was this one girl that, like all the others, I was just trying to get in with her friend group, please her, act like I'm cool, kind of one of that, like I somehow conform to her friends. And in all of these situations, I felt like the last thing I could be was be myself. And it's a shame, because in the end she ended up at the time going with the guy who was actually nothing like I would have expected her to be taking up with. And actually, as it turns out, that relationship ended up breaking her heart. So just goes to show you how funny things are. But then the end of college came. I had seen numerous people in college break off and become attached to someone, become engaged and get married. It was kind of like a running joke at the college I went to, at this Bible college. We called it, instead of Bible college, we called it Bridal college. It was just one of those cruel jokes that everybody would throw around. I mean, it was funny to some, but to guys like me and others in my boat, who were just stuck being single, you kind of just stung a little bit, especially those of us who were lonely. And in my case, I felt very unvalidated as a person, because I felt like I hadn't achieved that rite of passage. And it's a shame, because people shouldn't have to feel that way in order to feel validated as a person. That's definitely something, maybe not just really at the college I went to, but really our culture in general, that we feel like that's the thing that makes a person, proves a person that they're good as themselves. It's a shame that it takes the ability to win somebody romantically to make somebody feel that they have arrived somehow. But I went through several more years after college, but I forgot to mention one thing. That last year of college, I did meet a very sweet girl, and I really did take a liking to her. And I have to say that I can even remember the night I met her. I probably went out of my way to, impress her, and I would say she probably got a little bit more of a kick out of me just by me and my quirky ways and the weird things I would talk about, in a way that almost stood out to me. And I took notice, but she kind of was, I guess, hard to find sometimes. I can tell you one thing, though. I did manage to find a time to see her one-on-one, although it was kind of brief one evening. But I talk in another video about how we on the spectrum have very particular involved interests. I called it acute interests on the spectrum. And one of those was I was obsessed with the Three Stooges, growing up, and kind of still am. I don't watch them as often nowadays. Not that I don't want to, I just don't get around to it as much. But I remember then one night during that last year of college, I did get to see that girl, and we sat on a couch at the end of her dorm hallway, and I showed her a book I had about the Stooges, and she remembered that. And even when years later, when we got together again, she still remembers that very fondly. And that kind of shows you something about how special she was and is. But sure enough, college was ending. I was single. I never had the ability to say that I really had asked a girl out on a legit date at that point. I would have loved to ask this one girl on a date that I just mentioned, but I guess maybe the experience I just described with showing her that book about the Stooges kind of was the closest thing I could come. But I didn't really get to see her much the last several months of school because she was kind of, I think at that point not wanting to stay around college, and which was fine. I think I guess maybe in my mind I just thought that was just another one that wasn't meant to be, and as it turned out, she did move to the town where I live, and was there for a few years after I'd finished college and after she'd been there. But I got to see her a couple of times in the year after I finished college, but then we just kind of went our separate ways. I wasn't able to really get in touch with her. But there was one girl a couple of years later that I got to know and that I did get to go on a date with. I really have to say this was definitely a big step for me, because she really seemed to think that she genuinely liked being around me, and I had the courage to at least say, hey, can we go hang out? And she ended up being a very good friend. But she broke my heart, obviously, when she ended up falling for a guy that was actually younger than her. And this girl was several years younger than me, but the guy she ended up falling for, she ended up marrying later, and it was actually younger than her by about a year or two. And I don't know, maybe that just felt like a backbreaker for me, because I'm like, darn, here I am in my late 20s trying to find my way and find my independence. I was still I had been out of my parents' house but had moved back in with them, and I'm like, darn, I just felt like I went back to just feeling inadequate, too immature, too unqualified. And maybe in some ways, those years, I would say there was probably about 8 years between then and when I would end up being with the woman with whom I would get married. 8 years between the end of college and then. And in that time, there were some good, rich times where I got to find my way. I got my own place. My parents moved out of town. I had a steady job, even though it wasn't very much. I was making my way. And, it was, I would say it was probably about end of 2010. I had just actually, this one girl who I mentioned who ended up falling for that guy who was younger, I actually did go to their wedding, and it felt good to do that, and I was happy for them. But at the end of 2010, I didn't know whom I was going to find. Maybe I just thought I was going to sink into a doldrums and just kind of, felt like I had the pressure off, feeling like I didn't have to find anyone or try too hard to find someone at that stage. But I still think I might have been a little bit lonely. I didn't know where I was going with my life, but I definitely wasn't going anywhere bad, and I wasn't in a bad place. That girl whom I met my last year of college, I had actually told a friend of mine near the end of college, there were a couple of ladies I had just met that year who, oddly enough, I could see myself marrying. And this girl was one of them. Little did I know, or maybe I knew, but fast forward to about the end of January 2011. she ended up, this girl, posting some on her Facebook, and I had actually managed to find her on Facebook a couple years before, and we were friends, but she wasn't on there very much, so I didn't correspond with her a lot, or I didn't get to. But sure enough, she had just gotten her computer fixed and started to post a few things, and I, being the sly devil I am, just had to take a chance and say, like, hey, you live on the way down to where my parents live. Maybe one of these days I could stop by if I'm passing through and we could get coffee. Well, and she thought that would be great. Well, sure enough, I think one night in there, I remember the exact night, it was a Wednesday, February 9th, 2011. And I think whatever it was that night, I'm going to have to look it up. I actually have captured the screenshots from it. She responded to my comment I left on her post, and I responded back, and then we ended up going over to the Facebook Messenger where we could instant respond, and we ended up chatting on there. And that felt great, because I'm like, wow, here's this girl whom I thought was really cute back in the day and very sweet to me, and now we're talking again, and I'm like, this is good. I really thought this had some real potential. So, but sure enough, I ended up asking if I could call her, and she said, sure, here's my number. We talked on the phone that night. We ended up talking every night for the next week and a half. She ended up inviting me to come visit her. She was still living with her parents, but I ended up spending the night about 10 days later. And it was February 18th that we got to see each other again, and it had been 7 years. I'll never forget the hug she gave me when I arrived at her house. She told me later, she's like, I hugged you so good and I didn't want to let go. And I said, yeah, don't worry, we're going to have plenty of time to hug and reconnect and all those things. But I remember hugging her, and it was like remembering when I probably hugged her when I first knew her. We fell in love, and next thing you know, we were an item. And we'll have, I guess, officially, if you count from then, we'll have officially have been together 10 years. We'll have been married 10 years this coming October. But I got to tell you, there's something about the person who ends up being the right person for you. That person will teach you a lot about yourself. Not because they sit you down and say, this is what you need to know. It's not like that. I'm talking about you just learn a lot about yourself being with them, and you're able to be more self-aware and more at peace with yourself. I think the biggest struggle for me is, since I've been married, even as a married man, I've sometimes struggled to let myself be who I am, even around my wife. And I've learned, I think even in the last year with all that's going on in the world, I've learned to be myself a lot more and be a little more comfortable with it and not apologize so much, even more so than I probably would have in the past. And that's not to say that the previous 9 years we were married were miserable. That's not true. No marriage is perfect. But I have to say that each of us has been able to grow. It's been a reciprocal thing. And that's what's important, is that there's give and take. And I'm happy, because I know that when you're on the spectrum, that's something that's not easy to do. Often you feel like people are just giving or pushing, you're being pushed on all the time. That's not necessarily what's happening, but it can feel that way. It really is hard when you have experiences growing up with, bullying and and then feeling inferior and not feeling like you get on with people and with life in general, and then struggling to find the courage to do the adulting thing. I do another thing where I talk about adulting and how it is difficult for people on the spectrum, and that can be a great barrier to finding a romantic partner, because you want to be able to have the independence between yourselves as a couple, and you need to support one another. Well, definitely another thing is how oftentimes when we're on the spectrum, we feel that if we're rejected, that's another thing that further invalidates us. We feel like if one girl is not keen on us, then nobody can be. We feel like if somebody in her friend group isn't, then maybe that girl won't be. You know, it's just, we know, I think, in a certain sense that is silly, but it's just that our minds, because we're so black and white and so impulsively extreme in our thinking sometimes, that can easily happen. You can fall into those traps. And so that just seems to compound that fear a lot, the fear of rejection. And that's one thing that can certainly be a great barrier to really feeling brave enough to go out and find a partner and take a step. Somebody who is very close to me had years before said that whoever you fall in love with is a girl who's going to need to certainly take a good part of the initiative. Us guys are always thought that we need to be the chasers. I don't subscribe to that idea. I don't think that guys should not chase or should not take initiative. Of course we should. And in some cases, maybe that's just how a guy wants to go about it. But I gotta say that my wife, she took plenty of initiative with me, and I'm glad she did. I'm glad she was very clear from the beginning that she wanted to be with me, because I definitely wanted to be with her. And not only that, but even in spite of the times where I know I've not been perfect, in times where I feel like I have failed, she still wants to be with me. And there are times where, that's not to say there aren't times where maybe she's failed me, or that she's done or said wrong to me. I have to say that doesn't really happen very much, but I still love her. And it's important for me to remember that I can love her in spite of the fact that she's not perfect, but she loves me in spite of the fact that I'm not perfect. And it's definitely, it opens up a lot of things that are challenges to overcome when you're on the spectrum. But it's definitely something that I'm just thankful for, because not everybody who is on the spectrum can even say they have somebody whom they've ever been on a date with, much less be able to say that they've been married, that they've been in a good and stable marriage, and that we have a little girl. And hopefully I can look at the various aspects of social challenges, or even challenges in a marriage relationship, especially when you're on the spectrum. But today, I just wanted to share the fact that I managed to find someone, and that our story is so rich that if I kept going on about it, I would be here for hours. But I want you to know that I'm thankful that I have this. I can remember the day we got married, and I can remember the moment we held hands and said the vows. That was one moment in my life that felt so right, and where I felt so secure and so sure that what was happening right then was meant to be. That's an important thing. And that's something that I hope anybody who needs it in their life can eventually have. Just remember, it'll happen in its time. I know that sounds cliche, But just don't think that you're not worth it just because you haven't arrived yet, or even if you never do. You're always worth it, and you're always enough. So this is the Captain. Thank you for joining me on this epic voyage. And whether it's Valentine's Day or Singles Awareness Day, please celebrate yourself, because that's worth celebrating. All right. Have a good day.